behaviors and resources differently. Some cafes use an eighth core element, which is no set menu, but you are all familiar with those. So we're going to just go through the elements really quickly, and I want to leave some time for some questions because I know some of you are wondering how they're managed. So the first one is no set prices. Cafes do this differently. I know of 3 major ways that cafes run no set pricing. One is just a straight donation box. I think Steam Cafe still practices this, completely anonymous. The second way is a suggested amount and a cash register, so there's a point of accountability. The third way I know of is a la carte suggested prices as opposed to a whole meal suggested price with a cash register. There are a few variations on that, but those are the 3 major ways that pay what you can pricing works in our cafes. This is an example of One Acre Cafe. When you walk into their cafe, they have this at the entry. It kind of explains they have 3 dinner plate sizes. They have, you can pay it forward, you can volunteer in exchange for a meal, or you can pay the suggested amount. So that's a quick example of how one cafe advertises that the moment you walk in the door. The second one is patrons choose their own portion size. This, you'll see in a second, contributes to lower expenses because when you're letting people pay whatever they want for a meal, you're losing revenue. You have to make up for it somehow. So by people only taking what they're going to eat, there's less food waste, there's then less food cost. It's a way to keep expenses down. Cafes do this in a lot of different ways too. Some cafes have sit-down dining, some have buffet style. The point is that you let the patron in some way determine how much is on their plate. The picture there was Farm Cafe. They have a buffet line. Diners come in at the beginning, they decide on a plate size they would like, and then they tell the servers exactly how much they want. The servers are trained, they're educated to be able to ask those questions. They help inform people about making smart food choices and food size choices. The third functional element of the model is patrons may volunteer in exchange for a meal. And I want to highlight that word volunteer. It's not work. The IRS gets really hung up on people working and not getting paid for it. And so we need to educate everyone in the cafes, your volunteers, your staff, to use that word volunteer in exchange for a meal. It's very important. So this allows, obviously, everyone to eat. And cafes manage volunteers in many different ways. You'll find what works best for you, and I'm sure you'll have questions about that in a second. And once again, the volunteering in exchange for a meal goes to kind of our tagline that we offer a hand up and not a handout. So I love this photo because it's got the hands in the background. The next core element is healthy seasonal food served whenever available. Of course, this depends on the time of year. It depends on the price of organic food in your area. But obviously, healthy people, healthy food makes a better community. This is from Mustard Seed Cafe in El Paso. They have their own garden. A lot of the cafes, they either have their own garden or have gardens supporting them. Next is volunteers are used to the maximum extent possible to run the organization. Now, obviously, we talked about how are you going to make up the revenue that you lose because people are paying what they can or volunteering in exchange for a meal. This is one way. In almost all organizations, staff salaries are the biggest expense you have. Most of our cafes have very few paid staff, and they make up for it by allowing people to volunteer. Those are people who both volunteer in exchange for a meal and who just volunteer out of the goodness of their heart. This is a really complicated and complex element of the model. It has to be managed very, very carefully because you can imagine, for example, I think Farm Cafe has maybe 200, 300, Renee can talk to that, volunteers a month. Think of all the different people, the different personalities, the different capabilities that come into your cafe. It takes a lot of attention and management, and we can talk about that. And there's a lot about that in the new guidebook that we put out. It's a complex thing to manage. The next one is paid staff earn a living wage. This just goes hand in hand with who we are. Poverty and hunger go together. We want the people who work in our cafes to earn a living wage so that they don't fall into poverty themselves. And it just sets a good example of what we're all about. What a living wage is depends on your community. So you'll want to talk to restaurants in your area, find out what restaurant workers are making in your area, find out what the standard living wage is in your area, and try to offer something comparable. Health benefits and any kind of benefits is also in that. Most cafes can't afford that right off the bat, but that is included in what we're talking about as far as being paid a living wage. And then the last of the 7 core functional elements is a community table. And once again, Robert Egger was saying yesterday, we're feeding people, we're addressing hunger, but we're feeding something so much deeper than just hunger. We're feeding people's need to belong, to be a part of family. And I've heard so many stories from cafes about, like Tanzer that Robert Egger talked about yesterday. They come in, they find belonging, they find a purpose. They elderly people who are retired and maybe have lost their purpose, they're finding a reason. They're finding community, and that's what the community table serves. I could go on and on about this element. I love this element. People sit down, they have the best conversations. When I did my dissertation research, I loved listening to what the managers and the chefs told me about what they hear at these community tables. It's just so inspiring about us learning from each other, looking past stereotypes, perceptions change. It's amazing. And so at least one of these types of tables in a cafe, if you can manage it. Some cafes, all their tables are community tables. This is JBJ's Soul Kitchens. I don't think they're normally set up this way all the time, but for this particular evening, they had a great big long table right down the middle of the restaurant. And then the optional core element is the set menu. And in a few minutes, I'd like Renee Bowman to talk about this because she can really explain well why this works in her particular setting. It doesn't work for everyone, but it can really help save money and utilize volunteers well in some cases. This was, I think, at Mustard Seed, or maybe, I'm not sure which cafe this came from, but this is an example of their menu, which they change every day. So again, how does it work? Because you'll get that question so often from people in your community. You need to be able to educate them and make sure your staff, your board, and your volunteers can all articulate the same message about how it works. Basically, it works because we know we're going to have less revenue from diners, so we make up for it in cutting expenses elsewhere and raising money in ways that a normal restaurant or for-profit wouldn't. So how do you reduce expenses? These are some ways. I'll just let you read those. You've got to look for any way you can to cut costs, to make up for that revenue that's not coming in when diners don't pay the full amount. And by the way, this is hugely important. Cafes, we have found, need to have Renee told me was it allows you to utilize volunteers more effectively, because you think about it, if Renee's in the back and she's got a brand new volunteer and that volunteer's been told to shred carrots, and instead the volunteer chops them, she can still do it because there's no set menu. She doesn't have to waste anything. She can still use that volunteer and not make them feel bad. So it's a really great way to incorporate volunteers into your menu and into your food preparation.
Chris, I just want to mention 2 things. One reason I also went to no menu is to be able to cook with the seasons. I mean, that was part of my training, and then I also realized that food is more inexpensive and readily available when it's in season. And then as far as the Vitamix, I was with Renee and at Farm Cafe. Renee put that on her wish list, and somebody got that for her. So you can do that too, and it is a wonderful tool.
Sarah with 580. I'm just curious, how do you manage 200 plus volunteers?
I look at Tommy and I say, here's a new volunteer. What do you want to do with him? No, actually, we may have anywhere from 10 to 15 a day that come in. A lot of ours are students, and some of you will find this. We're in a university town, so students who are doing service, like Robert was talking about yesterday, but we also have all the regular cross-section of volunteers. We do them in 1 hour increments. And so we start at 9:30 in the morning. If you go through closing, it may be about 3:30, 4 o'clock at the end of the day to get everything cleaned up. So we can bring in anywhere from 4 to 5 at a time, a couple of dishwashers, people on the line serving food, people helping greet, people. And then your walk-ins, sometimes you do get into a situation where your walk-ins, who are the folks that need the food in exchange, then you can go to that other volunteer that signed up and say, hey, I'm going to bump you out today, or can you come back tomorrow, or something like that. And that's okay, especially if it's someone who's doing it for class credit. If you need to move them around, you can. But we have a large building, and it's old, and it needs a lot of work all the time. We do all our own laundry, so we always have laundry going. That's what Kim's here for. We do we do a lot of stuff that we can keep people engaged. But it can be a great challenge. And the biggest challenge for us, and some of you will find, is you have the most well-meaning people, particularly, I'm not picking on anybody, but church groups who will show up with 20 kids and go, we're here to volunteer. And you're like, no, you're not. I mean, you're just not, you know. Or people with young children who show up and it's like, this would be great for my 5-year-old. And we're like, it would. Yeah. Or if you want to stay with them all day. You know, we learned that. We learned a lot of things through making mistakes, but we learned if people are going to have their children, they're going to be there with their children. Our first year, we had people who were like, I'm going to the farmer's market, my 11-year-old will love to do this. And 3 hours later, they come back, and it's like, like, no. They can stay. You stay with them. You stay with them the whole time. You know, so there's lots of ways you tweak it and you learn. We use Volgistics. Volgistics is a program which we learned through One World Everybody Eats. One of the other cafes when we first started using that. You can talk to Tommy Brown over here about Volgistics. And it's a great program where people can sign up online and they can go in and out of that program. And you can also talk to Libby. We've had discussions about this. I'm offering her up. Whether you want to be public with your volunteers or not, that's something you need to consider. Ours are kind of public in terms of we put sheets out, people can know who else is volunteering, but you've got to be careful with some of that because that can lead to problems. But this is an interactive computer program. It's very user-friendly, and people can just go in, sign themselves in when they see something available, and we put descriptions on the website or on the Volgistics site so they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And then if they don't do it, they can take themselves off. That's absolutely the best for us because we can look at every day. That's the first thing you do. Print your volunteer sheet and go, I've got 5 people today. And then we can go online. If we only have 2 people that signed up, then we'll go online on our Facebook site or on the website and say, hey guys, we're low today. Is there anybody out there who can come kick in? And it usually works. It's very seldom that it doesn't work.
Okay, I'm going to cut the questions for now because we're going to move into our cafe operators panel, and a lot of these exact same questions could be answered then and even into our board panel. There's just one thing I want to close with, and it's something that Renee told me that I think is one of the most profound things I've heard about the community that we're feeding and that we're serving. You know, there are a lot of differences in political opinion about our cafes. Republicans feel away, Democrats feel away, and it usually has to do with a handout or with giving somebody something maybe they don't deserve. Renee told me that what she learned after being in the cafe for a while is that you're going to have people come in and you're going to look at them and go, why aren't you ably employed? You look capable, you're physically fit, you're strong, you dress well enough. You can volunteer, you can work, but they can't be employed. They've either got a social, an emotional, a disability of some sort, that they may look completely able-bodied, they may look completely, and maybe they can volunteer, maybe they can work. They can't be employed. It's what Renee said, it's a very key distinction to learn. And it's an answer sometimes to people who will say, we don't buy this, what you're doing with these cafes, giving people free food. We're bringing those kinds of people into community, and I think that is just so profound. So we'll move on to the cafe operators.
Thank you. So we're running
About 80% of your diners, 70 to 80%, paying the suggested price or more. It's almost the only way you can make it. So you have to appeal to people from all walks of life, but especially to people who can pay. So you need to be located in an area that's at a good cross-section of your demographic, certainly accessible to those in need, but also attractive and accessible to those who can pay, because you are going to totally rely on your paying diners. Ways that we increase revenues, obviously you don't pay federal taxes if you're a nonprofit. Accepting tax-free donations, accepting grants, going out and looking for grants. It's kind of hard to find grants as cafes because most grantors are not used to what we're doing. You really have to convince them. It's an educational process once again. Here's an example of one bistro. They frequently receive donations from their community. And then donations of gifts in kind. Hugely important also to receive produce, other kinds of gifts. Rochelle talked about getting a dishwasher. I mean, it's endless the types of donations you could get that then cut your expenses. This is a chart that Ari helped me come up with. It is in the new guidebook, and we'll also put this presentation online so you can refer to it more. It just kind of is a explanation kind of for those who need to see things graphically of the expenses that are being cut, the revenues that are being increased. And then to kind of sum it up, we basically have 3 cafe types with some variations on those. The first is like a full-fledged cafe, like Same Cafe, like Farm Cafe, that are open permanently in a permanent location most days of the week, have a pretty stable, consistent operation going on. The second type of a cafe is like Ari's Stone Soup in Massachusetts. They meet once a week or once a month would be a similar type. They're probably using some existing establishment, their kitchen, their building, but they're either doing this on purpose because that's all the more they want to do is once a week or once a month, or they're doing it to get open. They're doing some practice, they're raising money. For now, they just do once a week or once a month. And then the third type is at a for-profit restaurant that is allowing a pay-what-you-can meal on their menu. We have one of those in Nashville in North Carolina. It's otherwise a completely regular restaurant, but they offer a pay-what-you-can meal. One thing more I want to mention about this whole pay-what-you-can concept, the question you'll get is, if people have never heard about it in your community, is, that's crazy, people are going to take advantage of you, you're going to be out of business in no time. There haven't been any scholarly scientific studies on our cafes, but there have been on for-profit restaurants, especially over in Europe, that are offering pay-what-you-can. And what scientists are finding is that people do not take advantage of it. And it really goes counter to economic theory, because economic theory says people are going to take advantage of the market to the ultimate, to get the most they can out of, they're going to pay nothing. But scientists are finding that's not happening. And they say it's because it's kind of like this whole tipping thing in America. Why do people tip? It's custom. It makes you feel good inside because you've done the right thing. And they're attributing that same altruism, that same sense of decency to why people are actually paying instead of just taking a free ride. So it's a social, it's an emotional, it's a political thing to explore, and scientists still need to kind of to study this and understand why people are doing it. But the key thing for you to remember is people are not taking advantage of it. Scientists are not finding that. And if we have had any cafes that very rarely have a problem with that, very rarely, so you won't either. It's just people are doing the right thing. So how much, do we have any more time left? Okay, so are there any quick questions? We can talk about this a lot more later. We'll cover different elements, but are there any questions right now just about this 7? Jean?
I don't have a question, but I had an epiphany the last week when I was watching Downton Abbey. The servants' table. Look how narrow the servants' table is if you're watching Downton Abbey. Because if your common table is too wide, it does not help conversation. You need to have a table that's narrow enough so that people can actually be face to face and hear each other and each other's conversations.
Thank you. Renee, would you take that back to Renee? Renee, would you please just talk to us real quick about the no set menu concept?
At our place, what we do is no set menu, and that's based on, again, very similar to what they said about Denise. We would make ourselves crazy if we served the same thing every day. So in order to keep us not bored and engaged, that's part of our culinary creativity. But what we do is a different menu every day. We do have one set thing on the menu. On Thursdays, we have a sandwich that's become very popular that we worked on and created. And so for those folks that you do have that like to eat in a regular way, we have those regular characters that come up on Thursday, and that works well for us. But as far as the cost goes, the reason this works well is because we do buffet style, and because our servers actually portion out the food. You don't allow that guest to come through and get the food. Then you can reuse it. So our greatest friend, if you don't have one, you need a Vitamix. Vitamix is your greatest friend. Your Vitamix blender is your greatest friend. The only problem you have is when that person says, can you give me the recipe for this soup? And you go, I gotta go back 4 days to figure that out. Because it's got the golden beet soup for Monday, it's got the roasted red pepper soup from yesterday, it's got chipotles, it's got, in other words, we make things out of everything. We do not waste. People come through at the end of the day and say, what are you going to do with all this food? We're like, wouldn't you like to know? Come back in a couple of days. Let's see if you know what that is. You know, and the goal is not to serve food that's not good. I mean, we don't want to be known as leftover cafe. That's not our goal. But our goal is to reuse food, to make sure that people understand, and it allows for creativity. If you have rice left over, don't put cream in that soup, put rice in the blender. It thickens the soup and now it's nutritional. Those are the kind of things that you can do, that we do on a regular basis, to make sure that we extend our food, that we extend the amount of money we have, and that we can utilize all of that product. So I'll be glad to talk to you, Tommy Brown, Kim Short, anybody from my staff, will be glad to talk to you about how that works, and on an individual basis. So.
Thanks, Renee. And the other awesome thing